Hey there, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Hey, today we're in the kitchen. We're going to do some cooking with our produce from the garden. Today I've got a real special one. It is soup and theology. Look at that. Preview. Skins just come right off. No problem. In the bowl again. First things first. I took a lot of tomatoes out of the freezer that I grew this season. Some of them are kind of still frozen, but the smaller ones, these are those Edox tomatoes, an F1 hybrid. Okay, I have my tomatoes here. I have thawed them out and given them a little bit of a boil so you can see that the skins are just falling right off there. Now, I don't need all the juice that's in them, but I want the pulp. So I'm just going to peel the skins off and throw them to the side, move them over here to my bowl, and kind of peel off that center core. I don't want to be chewing on that stuff. I have a small head of cabbage that I harvested from the garden quite a while ago. So we're going to cut into this. Make sure, yep, it still looks good on the inside. I'm going to take out that stem. I'm just going to chop this up about the way I want to eat it in my soup. Cabbage is, I think, underrated. Historically, it's often thought of as a poor man's food, but it is filled with nutrients and very flavorful, I think. Take some onions, but we're also going to take some rutabagas. These are some small rutabagas from the garden. That'll just add a little bit of flavor, interest, and texture. Rutabagas are also an underappreciated crop. They're filled with nutrition, and this one, of course I'm using a gigantic knife today, but this one has a bit of crease in it that we're going to cut out, just so we don't have to deal with it. And we'll just peel that thing up and dice them and put them in the soup. If you don't do that with them, you get more nutrition out of this than you would a potato. Just going to peel these carrots roughly. I'm not going to worry about if I miss something. I'm just looking for visible dirt. And if I get visible dirt off, I'm happy. Holy. Chopping carrots is one of those things that reminds me of the holiness of God. And it's silly sounding, but it's all from a sermon illustration I heard from an evangelist named Paul Washer, who I highly regard and respect. And when he chops carrots and moves them over, he says, holy. Because holiness really doesn't mean, well, it does mean the opposite of sinless, or of sin and evil. But holy also means separate and different, and utterly different. God in his character is so utterly different than his creatures, that is, you and I, that he is holy. And holiness involves that sense of difference, that sense of separation and otherness that makes God so unapproachable by people who are not holy. And of course, we as Christians believe that we are being made holy by Jesus Christ so that we may be in the presence of God, who is holy. And the Bible says, be holy as he is holy. I can't do that on my own. I'm imperfect. I make mistakes. I'm a sinner. I need someone else to make me holy who's already holy. And that, of course, is God himself in the person of Jesus Christ. You may not believe that. That's too bad for you. I'm of the opinion that you will believe it someday when it's maybe too late. I hope not. All right, we got our carrots together now. That's enough carrots for me. I'm going to take me a big old onion here. About that much. There we go. Here are our vegetable ingredients so far. I need some celery. All right, a little bit of celery out of the garden. Let's see, that's frozen. That's about a cup. Maybe a little more. All right, it's frozen, but we're going to cook it so it'll thaw in the pot. All right, I'm going to start this dish in earnest here. Put some olive oil down there in my pot. It's nice and hot. And I'm going to brown my meat. What you're going to see on the bottom of your pan is meat sticking. That's okay. That's going to be flavor. Let it stick. It'll come off when you cook your stew. Just move this around and let it sit in there and singe until you get the caramelization on the corners of that meat. You want color. You want brown. Gray meat is not flavored. You want brown meat. Man, this meat was expensive. I can't believe how high the prices for meat has become. It's crazy. Man, I could have shot a couple of squirrels out of the tree for free and had better meat than this. That's just stew meat, and it was like $8 for just that. $8. Now a squirrel meat's supposed to be really, really good. But I'll tell you, if we're talking about theology, there was a time when squirrel was considered an unclean animal in the Bible. In the days of the Jewish law, the ceremonial law, the food laws, you couldn't cook a squirrel. It was considered unclean. It did not chew the cud nor have cloven hooves. And the reason for those food laws, you know, people think about kosher food and food laws from the Old Testament, and they think, well, what's that all about? The purpose of the ceremonial law was to set apart the Israeli nation, the Israelite nation of the Old Testament, as a separate people, a holy people, a peculiar people. Remember when I cut carrots and I moved them, apart? That apartness was the same kind of apartness that the Jewish nation was supposed to exhibit with regard to the nations around them. They were to be a separate and holy people. And that's one of the reasons the ceremonial laws were given to Israel, to set them apart. So they couldn't eat rats, tree rats, bats, reptiles. They couldn't eat a lot of food, mainly not because it wasn't good for them, but because that was what helped to set them apart as God's people who were holy, set apart, cut and moved aside. It was to illustrate and be a type of Christ. Christ is holy, and they were to look to Christ for their salvation. But yeah, the food laws were ceremonial. Then you come to the New Testament, and you find Acts chapter 10. Acts chapter 10, God came in a vision to Peter and said, "Hey, Peter, you can eat this stuff now." In fact, in Acts chapter 10, God said to Peter, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." In other words, the old food laws have been abrogated by the coming of Christ. Christ was the fulfillment of all the Jewish laws and ceremonial laws. And Peter was like, man, I don't know if I can do that, Lord. I'm not going to eat anything unclean. And God said, what God has made clean, do not call common, do not call unclean. And it happened to Peter 3 times. And finally Peter was like, well, I guess we can eat meat now. I guess we can eat squirrel. So, and the beauty of that is, if you study Acts chapter 10, there was a further exploration of what that meant. And it came to say that all people, not just the Jews, but all people, Gentiles alike, all cultures, were not unclean people. They were not unreachable people. They were not taboo people. But all people can come to God and have reconciliation with God. They were not necessarily, they did not need to be observant of all these crazy food laws. That when Christ comes, Christ invites all people to reconcile with God through him. And so the food laws were an illustration of holiness, but when the food laws were abrogated, it was also an illustration of the openness of the gospel message. So yeah, food and theology, they go hand in hand. Now, you might be tempted to put some water in here. Don't put water in the soup if you can't, if you can help it. Put some stock in there. Stock is always better than water. Beef stock is what we're going to use tonight. You could use any kind of stock, vegetable stock, whatever you have. Don't just use water. Water is wonderful, but if you're making a meal, you want to use some kind of stock. Get you one of these kind of tools. This is great for doing taco meat, breaking up spaghetti meat, and it's also good for tomatoes. I'm just going to break them up a little bit. You see some of them are squirting back at me. But I just want these broken up, crushed. So when you buy a can of crushed tomatoes, this is essentially what you're going to get. So I got all that juice, that tomato juice, the water that was inside, and that will go into our meal. Man, I should have my apron on, shouldn't I? When will I learn? What is that? I don't even know how much that is. It's that much. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put in our tomatoes with all that liquid. We're going to put some beef stock in there. How much? It's up to you. How thick do you want your soup? This is not, again, not a recipe. It's not really a how to, follow this. I'm going to put the whole thing in there. It is cooking by the heart. What feels good, what looks good. So we've got a whole, what is this, a 32 ounces, 2-pound box of beef broth into our soup. I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of my chili powder in there. Make sure it's nice and broken up. I don't want a big chunk falling out. But a good amount. I want some heat in here. This is the kind of recipe that you just kind of throw together with the ingredients you have and with the kinds of vegetables your garden is giving you. So I'm going to put that's about a teaspoon of salt. Put that in there. We'll flavor it more if we need to. And now we're going to put all our vegetables in. So in goes our celery. In go our onions. I've added 3 cloves of garlic because I like garlic. In go our carrots and our rutabagas. And we're going to let these cook before we put our cabbage in. The reason is I want my cabbage to just get wilty and have a little crispness. I'm going to cover it, bring it to a boil, and let it simmer until the vegetables become soft. And then we'll put our cabbage in, let that cook a little longer, and we'll be done. All right, let's give it a check. Stuff's starting to get soft, I think. Tomatoes are starting to break up a little bit, but not as much as I want. It's all right. Cabbage. There we go. That is the bulk of our meal right there, the cabbage. Let us serve some soup. It's more like a stew because it's thick, but it's a soup because it has a liquid broth. But there we go. Now I did have to add a little bit more stock to keep it from, diminishing all the way down to just dry boiled vegetables. But there we go. Let's go eat. Man, it smells so good. Just the smell alone. I can tell, I know it's going to be good just because of the ingredients. Altogether, you can't go wrong. Oh man. Oh, that's good. Needs a little salt. I won't lie. I didn't salt it enough. That little teaspoon we added. Probably not enough salt. So I'll put some salt in there. And we'll stir it up. Man, that is a hearty, hearty soup. Wow. Such a meal like this, made of humble ingredients, always reminds me of theology. Once again, here I go. I'm a preacher. If you don't like it, sorry. If you went to the British Museum back in the day, I don't know if it's that way anymore today, but the British Museum, they have an incredible collection of cultural antiquities. They've got the Great Babylonian Gate, this huge monument to this ancient culture. They've got all the Egyptian great statues that were robbed from Egypt and hauled away and put on display. The obelisks and things like that. Anything that they couldn't take is still out there in Egypt, like the pyramids, but anything that wasn't nailed down, is there on display. All these cultural antiquities, all these cultures, these great and mighty cultures. Yet the Jewish culture was always displayed by kind of a room off to the side, and there were no monuments or antique great things. No hero's gate, no monuments to kings, no mighty men on display as statues, nothing like that. Jewish culture was always displayed by their most common relics, and those relics were kitchenware, pottery, things of the home, things of the table. And that's because the Jewish religion was all about family and all about home, all about a meal, basically. In fact, one of the most solemn ceremonies was the Passover meal to remind them of their escape from Egypt and captivity. It was about a meal. And the biggest cultural ceremony of the Jewish people was just sitting around a table and having a very peculiar and particular meal. Now, this is good. And, it's the same way with Christianity. Christianity has no monuments. Christianity arose from, essentially, Judaism. Judaism was the precursor to Christianity. Judaism foreshadowed and was a type of Christianity to come. And, there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian, so to speak. Jews today and Jews in antiquity do not believe in Jesus Christ, and that separates them from Christianity. That's just the way it is, right? There's not like Judeo-Christian in terms of same religion. They're not the same religion, not at all, not in the least. But Christianity arose from Judaism. Wow, that's good. That meat just falls apart. That's awesome. And in Christianity, likewise, in true biblical Christianity, Christianity as defined by the Bible, not as defined how men have built, quote, Christianity, there are no monuments. There are no great places. There are no great statues. There are no great edifices that are biblical Christianity. Christianity is also represented at its highest cultural expression by a meal. It is the Lord's table, communion. And that is what Jesus Christ, in his wisdom, decided would best describe the relationship of his followers to him. And it's a meal. And so a good meal like this, a good hearty meal, it's just such almost a spiritual experience, because mankind was designed to appreciate a good meal. It's true. Boy, I could use a piece of bread right now. Big old hunk of crusty French bread. Ooh, these rutabagas are good. That is gold. Liquid gold. I don't know if there's a soup I've ever made that's as good as this. And I'm not just saying that for the video. That's good. Wow. Thanks for joining us on Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.